What's the girlfriend you didn't break up with? You survived her. I originally intended to just casually date a woman who turned out to have severe BPD, but I quickly realized I couldn't get rid of her. She wasn't book smart at all, but she was incredibly adept at manipulating people and working the legal system to her advantage. She flat out refused to leave my house. When I finally called the police to remove her, the officers told me they couldn't do anything because it was considered a civil matter. That response set the clock running for an official court hearing that was 4 whole months out. During those 4 months, she became even more nasty and abusive. She started stealing and hiding my personal belongings, systematically destroying items that were precious to me, and even spiked my drinks behind my back. She constantly prevented me from sleeping soundly, which really added up over time and destroyed my mental state. She was so deeply committed to messing with my life that she intentionally skipped a crucial court appearance for her own family matters, fully knowing that missing it meant losing custody and visitation rights to her young child with an ex. There came a point where I started locking her out, but she would literally break in while I was fast asleep. I'd wake up in the morning and find her sitting smugly on the living room couch. I actually went around and screwed all the doors and windows shut from the inside, and she still found a way to break inside my home again. Finally, the day in court arrived for the eviction and long-term stay-away order. She actually showed up to contest the order, despite knowing she had active warrants out for her arrest. The courtroom was bustling and chaotic that morning, with a judge ordering parties from several cases to step out into the hallway to work out details before ruling. When my case was finally called, I stood before the judge and carefully laid out my entire argument with meticulously documented evidence. When her turn came, she had nothing to offer except lame, unconvincing excuses. The judge ruled completely in my favor, granting the maximum length for the protection order. Right then and there, 2 armed bailiffs appeared at her sides, placed her in cuffs, and led her out of the stunned, silent courtroom straight to jail. That night, I got the absolute best sleep I had experienced in months. The physical abuse, constant disruption, and psychological mind games were terrible enough on their own, but what made the entire ordeal infinitely worse was the attitude of almost literally everyone from friends and neighbors to acquaintances, and throughout most of it, even the police officers. Everyone automatically assumed she was somehow the innocent victim just because she was a woman. Because I was the man in the situation, they assumed I was the villain, or at best, that it was somehow my fault for letting it happen. It was utterly mind-boggling how much abuse and criminal behavior she got away with, without facing a single consequence. I knew that if I lifted even one finger to defend myself, I would be the one whisked off to jail, leaving her with free run of my own property. She knew that institutional bias existed and exploited it to the absolute maximum. Cultural note. In our civil law, when an individual resides at a property for an extended duration, even without a lease or financial contribution law, enforcement officers often classify unwanted occupants as legal guests rather than trespassers, designating the situation as a civil tenancy dispute. This distinction restricts officers from performing immediate physical removals, requiring property owners to pursue formal judicial eviction proceedings and court-issued protection orders. She was extremely beautiful, highly intelligent, deeply damaged, and pathologically incapable of staying faithful to one person. The first few months together felt like an incredible love story that moved across different countries. It was pure romance, and I was completely infatuated with her. Then we had to spend some time apart for work commitments, and she immediately started an affair behind my back. She spent months gaslighting me, trying to push me into breaking up with her so she wouldn't have to face being the villain of the story. I eventually uncovered the truth and walked away. A few months later, my phone rang out of the blue from an unknown number. It was her. We talked for hours, then agreed to meet up in person. Just like that, the wild romance ignited all over again. But this time, the foundational trust was completely gone. Since it was a long-distance setup, I knew deep down that she was incapable of monogamy, and that history would repeat itself. Sure enough, it happened again at least once, though likely multiple times. We stayed together on and off for about 4 years, and over that span, it devolved into the most toxic, destructive, and awful relationship imaginable. It stopped feeling like love and became more like an ongoing madness. Every single interaction turned angry and desperate. The late-night phone calls, the weekend trips, the arguments, the emails, the text messages, and even our physical intimacy. It became a psychological competition to see who would break first. She was habitually dishonest, serially unfaithful, cruel, and deeply manipulative. I don't even think she wanted to be that way, but she seemed completely unable to stop herself. In return, I became bitter, distrustful, and deeply hurt, saying terrible things back to her week after week, month after month. In the end, we met up one last time when it was blatantly obvious she had started another affair with a work colleague. We half-heartedly agreed to keep trying, but almost as soon as I left to head home, my phone rang. She called to tell me it was officially over. In that exact moment, the fog of insanity from those 4 years suddenly cleared from my mind. All I felt was an overwhelming wave of relief that I could finally restart my life. During the months that followed, as I slowly rebuilt my daily routine, I realized I had truly survived a chaotic nightmare and was finally coming back to life. Cultural note: psychological research on long-term toxic dynamics indicates that high-conflict, long-distance relationships often generate an addictive cycle of anxiety and relief known as emotional intermittent reinforcement. When partners fluctuate unpredictably between extreme romantic affection and systemic infidelity, victims experience elevated stress levels, often mistaking the psychological chaos and intense reconciliation for genuine relationship passion. I had an ex who was great as a casual friend, but she turned into an absolute nightmare the moment we started dating. When we were just friends, she was always nice to me and seemed like a genuinely decent person. She was extremely pretty and way out of my league. When she actually said yes to dating me, I was completely shocked and felt like I was floating over the moon. Then, barely a week into the relationship, my life turned into constant suffering. Every single conversation revolved entirely around her. I could never get a word in edgewise. On the rare occasions where I managed to talk a little bit about myself, she would immediately hijack the topic and change the subject right back to her life. She set these bizarre rules for public affection too. I was only allowed to walk arm in arm with her in public, but I was strictly forbidden from holding her hand. Before we officially got together, she would constantly lead me on physically and tease me. Once we started dating, all of that vanished, and I was only allowed to give her basic hugs and quick kisses. The final straw came when one of my absolute best friends was tragically taken away in a horrific car accident. She was the type of person who constantly wanted to go out and do fun activities, but when I lost my close friend, I fell into a very dark hole. My natural introversion took over completely, and I built up emotional walls, having zero desire to leave my house or go out anywhere. Instead of showing an ounce of empathy, she kept bugging me relentlessly to go out and entertain her. Whenever I told her that I simply didn't feel up to it, she pushed back with cold indifference. She went as far as saying, "Well, he was my friend too." She was insinuating that she was hurting just as badly as I was, expecting me to drop my grief and forget about losing my friend just to take her out. Every single day I spent with her completely drained the energy out of my soul. I was miserable, exhausted, and deeply depressed, so I started making lame excuses just to avoid seeing her. She ended up breaking things off with me before I even got the chance to end it myself, claiming I wasn't being attentive enough to her needs. Even after the breakup was over, she remained totally insufferable. She made multiple pathetic attempts to flirt with and hit on my closest guy friends. Thankfully, my small circle consists of real friends, and every single one of them told her to stay far away from them. I promised myself from that day forward that I would run as fast as I could from anyone who showed those traits again. It was a very long road out of that dark hole, and I still deal with occasional struggles with anxiety and emotional distress. But I built a fantastic support system around me. Today, I am happily married with our first child on the way, while she remains unmarried and completely incapable of keeping a partner. Life will kick you when you're down, but if you keep going, it rewards you in the end. Cultural note. In relational clinical psychology, partners who display extreme self-centeredness and a complete lack of empathy during a significant loss often exhibit severe narcissistic traits. Research indicates that when a grieving individual retreats into protective isolation, a self-absorbed partner perceives the withdrawal not as pain, but as a threat to their need for constant attention, frequently leading to secondary emotional burnout for the victim. We had already broken up and mutually agreed to terminate the pregnancy. I was completely out of state at the time, and she called me to confirm she had gone through with the procedure. 6 months down the line, right as I was packing up to start my freshman year of university, she dropped a massive bomb on me. She told me she was having the baby with or without my involvement. I spent my entire first year in university driving 2 full hours every single Friday afternoon just to be with her and our newborn son. I stayed through Monday, then drove 2 hours right back to campus to grind through my classes on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. That exhausting weekly routine went on for a whole year. All the while, I kept catching her messaging other men and cheating on me behind my back. She lied straight to my face every time I confronted her, but I always let it go. I was so deeply in love with her and my baby boy that I just swallowed the pain. I eventually finished my degree, landed a solid job, and we moved into a place together. I told her she didn't even need to worry about working. I promised to cover every single bill so she could stay home. Even then, the pattern never stopped. I kept catching her flirting with other guys and constantly being unfaithful. I was just so desperate to keep my family together that I kept looking the other way. Then came the sudden breaking point. She ran off out of nowhere with a random guy, married him within a single week, and moved across the entire country, taking my son with her. Because of her early manipulations, I wasn't listed on his official birth certificate, leaving me with zero legal rights as his father. When she eventually traveled back into town for the holiday season, I immediately took her straight to family court and fought hard until a judge granted me legal access to my boy. Even now, she actively goes out of her way to paint me as a complete villain in front of him. It utterly destroys my soul to watch my own son call another man dad, knowing how relentlessly I fought to be there for both of them. That final legal battle happened 2 years ago, and I honestly still don't know how to move forward with my life. I feel like I can't trust another human being, and I can't even bring myself to enter the dating world again. I just sit here trapped in place, mourning the loss of the family I gave everything to protect, while watching her walk away unharmed. Cultural note. Under United States family law, unwed fathers are not automatically granted parental rights if their name is omitted from the legal birth certificate at the time of delivery. Establishing legal paternity requires executing a voluntary acknowledgement of paternity AOP form or obtaining a court-ordered genetic DNA test to secure formal visitation rights and prevent relocation disputes. This is my first time posting to one of these communities, so here we go. My ex and I have been broken up for just over a month now. We are in complete no contact. But honestly, it has felt like I have been trying to figure out who I am and rediscover my identity all over again. Towards the end of our relationship, I did not know who I was anymore. I did not trust myself, and I did not think I was capable of making reasonable decisions. The daily routine that I had cultivated for years simply ceased to exist. Nothing felt like it was me anymore. I became this shell of my former self, operating with only the single-minded will to please my partner, which of course was never good enough for her. The themes of our arguments were always running on an exhausting loop. She would constantly throw the exact same phrases at me. "I need more from you to feel secure in this relationship. You never defend me. You are not making me a priority. Your friends make my life a living hell. I am the only one who is willing to change for this relationship. I just feel like I cannot trust you." We were together for 1 full year, and for 10 months of that time, it was nothing but constant fighting. At first my thought was, this happens in relationships. It is okay. We will make it through this together. But then it got progressively worse. The fights became much more frequent and grew more and more intense. They got to the point where I was starting to physically pull at my own hair when we would fight, just trying to process the pain. Then the full-blown anxiety attacks started happening. It felt like I was completely trapped in those endless arguments. It felt like there was no way out, no action I could do, or words that I could say would get through to her, or even slightly change her mind. She would not even let me leave the room to take a brief 5-minute break from the argument sometimes, because to her, stepping away showed that I was not able to have those difficult conversations. When I actually did manage to get a break, I would not come back for up to an hour sometimes, simply because I just did not know what to do anymore. Most of those times I would walk out of her house, get into my car, lock the doors, and just bawl my eyes out, because I felt like I did not know anything anymore. I would always try so hard to make up for all of it. I tried to date her again, trying to show her love in the exact way that she specifically asked to receive it. I would do all these specific things that she demanded, and we would be completely fine for maybe 2 days. But then she would bring up something again, something I did wrong in the past, or claiming I was taking the easy route by going on a date we had already talked about, instead of being spontaneous enough, or any of the other reasons I mentioned earlier. Towards the last few months of our relationship, it was at least 3 times a week that we would get into a major blowout. By this point, I fully believed that I was the actual problem in the relationship, and that I was the sole person who needed to change. My therapist had once told me, "From how you are describing her behaviors, I think she has BPD," but I was accused of so much by her that I genuinely believed I was the one who had BPD. At this point, she had been threatening to break up with me for at least 3 months straight. She was actively picking fights with my friends during this period too. Those fights always ended up with her lecturing me, "Your friends treat you like garbage, and I think you need new friends." My friends would never treat you like that. The whole situation was completely maddening. I did not know anything anymore, and my reality was entirely shattered. Looking back at all of it now, this relationship changed me forever. I used to get broken up with in the past and immediately fiend for another relationship, but right now I am genuinely just scared to date anyone. I know there is still a lot of emotional processing I need to do, and eventually my view on relationships will change as long as I put in the work to heal. I know I am doing better today because the heavy weight lifted from that relationship felt like a huge relief. There are still parts of myself that I have to rediscover, but one thing I have realized through all of this is that your support system is everything. They help me get to a much better place and continue to help me improve every day. To anyone who aligns or resonates with this, things really do get better after breaking it off. It is tough, but the mental space you get from just not having to worry about the next argument is enough to make you cry with relief. If you feel stuck, please know that having a strong support system makes all the difference. Reaching out to family, friends, or a professional kept me grounded when I felt like losing my mind. Today, through therapy and processing that pain, I am finally healing and moving forward. It feels really good to share all of this with a bunch of strangers. Cultural note. In clinical psychology, experiencing persistent verbal attacks and volatile emotional shifts from a partner with severe personality instability frequently induces secondary traumatic stress and cognitive destabilization in victims. Research shows that establishing a structured social support system, including trusted family members and professional mental health counselors, is a critical factor in rebuilding self-efficacy and restoring cognitive reality following prolonged psychological abuse. My most recent ex was a narcissistic control freak who trapped me in an abusive, coercive relationship. Long story short, she started off as my housemate, and after a while, we ended up becoming a couple. Initially, she was extremely sweet. I shared a lot of personal things with her, and she was very pretty with a high sex drive to match. In my eyes back then, I thought I had hit the absolute jackpot. Before long, however, she started pushing me into doing things I wasn't comfortable with at all. She actually demanded that I propose to her after we had only been together for 1 month. She also started coercing me into intimacy when I wasn't in the mood, getting intensely angry whenever I said no. She drank heavily due to supposed stress, and whenever she drank, she became far more aggressive and confrontational. She physically struck me many times after claiming I did something stupid. She even gave me deep scratches across my back, simply because she became convinced that other women were looking at me. She made me feel guilty whenever I did normal activities like seeing my friends or going to the gym without her. At one point, she tried to force me not to travel to London to see a play with my family, who she was convinced hated me. As a last resort to control me, she intentionally took a dangerous amount of prescription medication right in front of me. I still went to London anyway because I refused to let her manipulate me. When I came back, she suddenly became apologetic and promised she wanted to change. That turned out to be a complete false dawn, as things only got progressively worse from then on. The string finally broke exactly 5 years to the day we met. While I was out on my company's Christmas night out, she physically assaulted me right inside a crowded nightclub. That was the absolute limit. I immediately reported her to the police, and officers arrested her right on the spot. She ultimately pleaded guilty to criminal assault in court. She was sentenced to 40 hours of unpaid community service, and the judge placed a strict restraining order on her. I strongly believe she suffered from unmanaged borderline personality disorder. The fact that her father was a licensed medical doctor and seemed completely oblivious to her obvious controlling behavior was utterly baffling to me. Like what you see? Subscribe to the Reddit Oracle for more. She entered my life right when I was finally getting everything back together after a long, painful battle with a chronic health condition. I got played so hard that every single day I still feel completely foolish for ever letting it happen. I had never experienced love bombing before in my life, so it worked on me like a charm. She led me to believe she was just a sweet woman who had dealt with a ton of bad luck and past trauma. The cold truth was that she simply needed cash. I noticed a couple of red flags early on, but I gave her the benefit of the doubt. During that initial rush of affection, she gave me a desperate speech about constantly robbing one account to pay another just to survive. I fell for it completely. Within a couple of months, I wasn't just paying for normal relationship dates, I started giving her an extra $400 a month. Then that number got bumped up to $600, then $800, and it just kept climbing. I genuinely wanted her to be my final relationship, so I gave her all the love I had in me. I thought she loved me back, but looking back now, I am certain she didn't even like me as a person. When my apartment lease ended, I moved into her place for a couple of months while we actively looked for a new home together. Everything still seemed great, but the exact moment I signed the new lease contract with her, she pulled a complete 180. Within 30 days of moving into our new place, suddenly every single thing about me was wrong. My job, my clothes, my personal belongings, my close friends, and my family, literally every single detail that made me who I was, became a problem to her. She insisted we constantly needed more money, even though we had laid out a strict budget before moving in to make sure we could afford the place. We had agreed to split the monthly bills down the middle. I put some utility accounts under my name, she took others under hers, and I handed her my half of the rent every single month. Yet it was never enough. Whenever I asked to look at the actual bill statements so we could adjust our monthly budget, she would explode with rage and drop the subject entirely. Skipping to the beginning of the end, the reality finally came out. Even though we earned roughly the exact same salary, I was paying for absolutely everything except her car payment and the cable bill. Just try to imagine how much of an emotional nightmare she truly was. You won't even come close. She is a deeply unwell person. Cultural note. In relational psychology, love bombing followed by financial exploitation is a classic tactic of coercive control and narcissism. Perpetrators build rapid emotional dependency during the initial phase to establish trust, making victims far more susceptible to financial extortion and abrupt behavioral shifts known as devaluation once legal or living commitments are secured. Where do I even begin with this mess? I had been single for 2 solid years when my roommate's girlfriend introduced me to her. For the first 6 months, everything felt unbelievable. She checked every single box I could ever want in a partner: intelligent, successful, gorgeous, and the connection between us was off the charts. For her upcoming birthday, I decided to go big and bought us a full-week trip to a resort town by the beach. The day before our flight was when everything started tumbling downhill. Out of nowhere, she stormed into my place and began tearing my entire apartment apart, screaming that I was hiding other women behind her back. She finally calmed down after a grueling 4-hour screaming match. I was completely drained, so I went to sleep on the couch while she crashed in my bedroom. I was abruptly shaken awake in the middle of the night by her striking right at my face and ribs, yelling that I was a cheater. None of it was true, but she was entirely convinced she was right. We ended up missing our flight and couldn't get a backup booking. She immediately blamed me for ruining her birthday vacation, called me the worst boyfriend on earth, and walked out. I was left sitting there in the quiet room, wondering what the hell had just happened. The very next morning, I woke up to the sound of my front door opening. I stood up and saw her standing in the living room wearing an oversized winter jacket. In my head, I immediately thought, "Oh no, here we go again." Instead, she started apologizing profusely and told me she desperately wanted to make it up to me. She unzipped her jacket to reveal she was wearing almost nothing beneath it, and we spent the entire day together. She kept apologizing, explaining that her previous partners had cheated on her and that her sheer terror of losing me triggered her outbursts. That exact same cycle repeated itself almost every 3 months for 2 straight years. Every massive explosion led to an anything-goes day, where she fulfilled every fantasy I could ever think of just to keep me hooked. Looking back, I honestly don't know why I stayed mesmerized by her for so long. I repeatedly caught her stepping over boundaries we had clearly established, whether it was staying in touch with her ex or going out for wild nights with her friends where I'd hear about her flirting with other guys. A year into the relationship, the husband of one of her close friends pulled me aside at a gathering. He warned me to be extremely careful with her because he knew her real track record and didn't want to see me get destroyed. I really wish I had listened to him instead of letting her ruin countless holidays and birthdays. The whole ordeal ended when she broke up with me on my own birthday. I had been upset because she canceled my birthday weekend plans I had organized months in advance with my closest friends, just so she could go party somewhere else with her friends. When she dumped me, she turned everything around and claimed I was insecure, controlling, and abusive. When it was all over, I felt completely lost, constantly questioning why I tolerated physical and psychological toxicity for 2 full years. But that wild, intense reconciliation after every single fight was the exact dopamine fix that kept me trapped in her grip. Cultural note. In relational psychology, the pattern of intense verbal or physical outbursts, followed by extreme physical intimacy, is recognized as a traumatic bonding cycle fueled by intermittent reinforcement. The unpredictable shift between high-stress conflict and sudden neurochemical rewards releases spikes of dopamine and adrenaline, creating a psychological dependence that makes it exceptionally difficult for victims to detach from toxic cohabitation dynamics. My previous girlfriend had some serious, deep-seated family issues. Every single week with her was stressful as hell. First off, she completely hated giving me any personal space. When I had to relocate 2,000 miles away for a job opportunity, she made my life extremely difficult as we were forced into a long-distance setup. Second, she had a long history of intentionally hurting her own body, and she flat out refused to seek professional treatment. Every single month, it was the exact same old routine. She would message me saying, "I relapsed again." I would gently suggest that she return to the mental health facility for a couple of weeks to get proper support, but she simply did not care at all. When I moved away, one of her older male coworkers started acting legitimately gross and mean toward her all the time. His presence created a ton of tension in our relationship. I literally told her, "Hey, just keep me in the loop about what's going on so I don't get blindsided." She proceeded to blindside me anyway. I eventually found out through a guy I went to high school with that she was actively staying overnight at this older coworker's house. Now, I wouldn't have even had a major issue with it as long as there were no other options available and they were sleeping in separate rooms or on the couch. In reality, there were plenty of safe places she could have stayed. Both of my parents were more than happy to take her in if she needed a roof over her head. Her own best friend said straight to my face that her front door was always open and all my ex had to do was ask. Keep in mind, this guy was 40 years old, had served time in prison, and was currently on parole while actively going after an 18-year-old girl. Her pathetic excuse for staying at his house was, "He taught me a lot of practical life skills." The guy had literally been locked up for breaking into his ex's house. His so-called life skills were completely useless. I was so completely drained and disgusted by the entire situation that I blocked her number for 2 full months just to get my head straight. To top it all off, she even complained because I was gaining healthy weight for a guy of my height and build. Walking away was the only way I survived that madness. I recently ended a relationship with a woman who turned out to have severe BPD. At first, she seemed like my dream woman, immensely talented, an intense mutual physical attraction, and we shared the exact same taste in music and movies. We hit it off immediately, and the connection felt incredibly strong right from the start. Everything was going perfectly until suddenly, every single interaction turned into a major conflict. Every text message, every phone call, every video chat became a high-stress puzzle where I had to carefully calculate how to phrase simple words just to avoid triggering a complete meltdown. One day, I casually mentioned that I was getting ready for an upcoming trip to go visit her, and I promised to call her that evening once I finished packing. She completely lost it. She accused me of putting her on a shelf for the day, screaming that I wasn't making her a priority. That single incident barely scratches the surface of the things that would instantly escalate from zero to absolute warfare. I have always considered myself a good communicator, but my mental health plummeted hard for several continuous weeks. I ended up in therapy, and the relationship is now officially over. The mutual friend who introduced us had no idea things were that bad, and felt terrible about how everything unfolded. BPD is really nothing to play around with. The absolute kicker? She is not in treatment and insists that therapy only makes things worse, which sounds completely absurd to me. During those months, I felt less like a romantic partner and more like a full-time psychiatric nurse and caretaker. The day I finally called it quits, her mother, whom I had never even met in person, called my phone directly. She begged me to stick around, claiming her daughter was worth the trouble. I laid out everything in plain detail, how I had been treated over the past few months, the verbal insults thrown at me, and how she repeatedly blamed me whenever she threatened to do something awful to herself. Her mother simply replied, "Oh yeah, she does that exact same thing to us too." That is so far from okay. The entire experience was a living nightmare, even though it started off so wonderfully. Somewhere deep inside her is a genuinely wonderful person I fell for. But that person is held captive by an unmanaged condition. She still texts me occasionally, and every single message is sent with the sole intent of making me feel terrible. It is never to check in, never an apology, and never a pleasant conversation. It is always a subtle jab designed to provoke a defensive reaction out of me. I am just glad she no longer holds that kind of power over my life, and I sincerely hope she gets professional help. That relationship was something I genuinely had to survive, and since clean communication was impossible, cutting off contact was the only way out. Cultural note: borderline personality disorder, BPD, is a psychiatric condition characterized by intense emotional dysregulation, and extreme fear of abandonment, and volatile interpersonal relationships. In clinical psychology, partners of untreated individuals frequently experience caregiver burnout and secondary trauma, as emotional crises and threats of self-harm are often used as extreme defense mechanisms against perceived rejection. I have survived several relationships that felt like walking through a war zone. The first one had mood swings so severe that her constant psychological abuse was driving me into a deep depression. I realized back then that she could easily drive someone to do something permanent to themselves, and I refused to let that person be me, so I walked away. Years later, I found out she dated a former coworker of mine who ended up doing that exact terrible thing. The second ex was heavily addicted to prescription pills. She quickly turned abusive, threatening, and extremely manipulative. We were living together at the time, but I was planning to move out at the end of the month. I had told her months prior, even though I did not have a new place lined up yet. One night, she tried to do something drastic right in front of me, placing the full blame of her actions on my shoulders while I frantically called 911. When the emergency responders arrived, she sweet-talked the paramedics so well that they were actually going to leave her in the apartment with me. I had to suddenly flag down one of the responding police officers and pull him into the hallway. I explained to him that I was not safe staying in that apartment with her, that she had been making severe threats against both of us, and that she desperately needed to be transported to the hospital. She pulled the exact same trick with the emergency room doctor on call. She insisted it was all just a misunderstanding, convincing the doctor to release her into my care. I went wide-eyed, immediately shook my head, no, and the doctor pulled me into the hallway to get the real story. I explained the reality of the situation, having already contacted her family. Her family fully supported asking the physician to place her under a mandatory 72-hour psychiatric hold. That crucial window gave her family time to travel down, while giving me a safe window to pack my belongings and escape. While she was held at the facility, I gathered everything I could carry and moved out for good. I met her sister at the airport. She dropped me off at the train station, and that was the absolute end of it. She later emailed me demanding money, claiming I had ruined her life. The last time I looked her up, she was living on the streets and had completely vanished from social media, where she used to be very active. The third ex was actually my fiancé, and she threatened to make me disappear through her family's power. That was not an idle threat. Her family were literal billionaires who owned half of a major United States city and had deep ties to organized crime. She was a master manipulator, insanely jealous over nothing, emotionally ruthless, and it started getting physically violent. In the end, I was not broken up with by her, but by her father and the family lawyer. I was strictly forbidden from ever contacting her again. On her side, her father threatened to completely cut her off financially, take her daughter away, and force her into a psychiatric institution for aggressive medical treatments. Mind you, I was in my late 30s and she was in her early 40s at the time. To make matters crazier, we worked together at a company she managed, which I later discovered was entirely owned by her father. The exact day our relationship was forcibly ended by her family happened to be the very same day I delivered a massive project that I ran completely by myself, valued at $10 million. I certainly know how to pick them. Cultural note. Under U.S. mental health law, a mandatory 72-hour psychiatric evaluation, often referred to as an involuntary hold, allows medical professionals and law enforcement to detain individuals who pose an immediate threat to themselves or others. Emergency room personnel frequently rely on private interviews with cohabitants or family members to override a patient's attempts to minimize behavioral crises during intake. Jesus, where do I even start with this mess? The very night I found out she was cheating on me, she immediately packed up and moved in with the other guy. Keep in mind, we'd been living together for 4 whole years. While I was sitting there in shock trying to figure out what just happened, my phone started blowing up non-stop. She kept calling me while I was at work, demanding to know who I was with. She insisted I tell her the truth, since we weren't together anymore and had no reason to hide anything. Yes, those were her exact words. I would get relentless calls from her number, and when I finally picked up, it was the new guy on the line threatening me. Then she had the nerve to tell me we could get back together once he went back home in 2 months. Sounds like a great deal, right? One afternoon, that same guy knocked on my door and let himself right into my place using her spare keys. He walked in, stood in my living room, and told me that this was his apartment now. That was a joke, so I knocked him straight onto his feet. He immediately ran crying to the police because I refused to let some random guy my ex cheated with take over my home. We still had 2 full months left on the apartment lease. Since I was living overseas in Germany at the time, I didn't have any family or friends to stay with, so I had no choice but to endure her absolute madness. Eventually, the guy left, and she instantly wanted us to be together again. I never bought into her games, but I played nice because she was completely unhinged. Then one day, I walked into the apartment and caught some random guy using illegal substances right off my dining table while refusing to leave. Because her name was still on the lease contract under German law, I couldn't legally kick her guests out of the apartment. I called the local police to report the illegal substances, but they searched the room and found nothing left. The 2 guys went outside for a minute, and when they tried to push their way back in, the police told me I had to let those strangers inside the home I paid for because they were her invited guests. Yes, you heard that right. It gets even better. One of those guys actually threatened me with a sharp utensil right in my own kitchen. To top it off, I periodically walked in on her being intimate in bed with random strangers. We had a strict agreement not to bring anyone over while sharing the place, but she didn't care at all. Cultural note. Under German residential tenancy law, CO tenants who are jointly listed on a lease agreement possess equal rights to the property regardless of financial contribution. Neither tenant can unilaterally bar entry to the other tenant's invited guests without a formal court injunction or documented physical violence, creating complex legal dilemmas for roommates or former partners during mandatory lease notice periods. I honestly think I might win this thread. My ex aggressively pursued me from the very start, but then she decided to mess around behind my back while lying straight to my face. She even went so far as sharing my private, intimate photos with her coworkers at her workplace. When we first started dating, a strict condition of my consent for intimacy was that we used a reliable form of birth control. She promised me she was on the pill. She flat out lied about it, and she ended up pregnant. I found out later that she actually had a handwritten baby contract tucked away with her ex-boyfriend. Throughout our time together, she constantly used psychological tactics to manipulate and control me, like buying me ridiculously expensive gifts to make me feel indebted to her. I am completely convinced she was a sociopath. She felt zero guilt about anything, but she fully understood human emotions and happily played with people's feelings for fun. During the entire ordeal, she kept claiming the pregnancy was an absolute miracle because she supposedly had severe medical issues and was told by doctors that she could never have a child. She systematically forced me into a position where I was totally isolated from my friends and my family. Absolutely no one in my inner circle knew what I was going through behind closed doors. My anxiety got so high that I resorted to soft physical releases, flicking my wrists with rubber bands until the skin broke, and occasionally punching walls with my bare hands just to ground myself. To top it all off, I was eventually forced out of my own workplace because of her. She started spreading wild rumors about me around the office, making up complete lies or taking tiny truths and embellishing them to ruin my reputation. I would never normally say something like this outside of this specific situation because I know how traumatizing it is, but thankfully, the pregnancy ended naturally on its own. That sudden loss meant she didn't get to ruin my entire life or subject an innocent child to 18 or more years of her toxic behavior. I ended up with moderate depression and severe crippling anxiety from those months, but I survived it, and I am slowly getting my life back on track. Cultural note: reproductive coercion, such as lying about contraception usage, is increasingly recognized by clinical psychologists and legal frameworks as a severe form of domestic abuse aimed at establishing permanent control over a partner. Furthermore, non-consensual sharing of intimate images is classified as a distinct criminal offense under revenge pornography laws across multiple United States jurisdictions. If you like these stories, make sure to subscribe to the Reddit Oracle.